This time on Past Deadline, this week's news in 60 seconds and a conversation with Teresa Homsi about the 2019 Clery Act Campus Safety Report. I'm your host, the other Ben Jodway, and this is Past Deadline, your behind-the-scenes look at Central Michigan life. Here's this week's news in 60 seconds. In an email sent to campus on January 8th, CMU President Bob Davies outlined the university's efforts to make vaccinations accessible to anyone who wants them. He said CMU will administer vaccines while remaining within guidelines from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The phases will begin with frontline medical workers, then other essential workers, and work its way down. CMU celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day this week with a community peace service on Monday. The 2-hour event had several speakers talk about his legacy and the importance of continuing his work. On Wednesday, the mother of Trayvon Martin, Sabrina Fulton, spoke about her experiences and the future of racial injustice. On Wednesday, CM Life spoke to Lance Wood, the president of College Democrats at CMU, and Olivia Ammerman, president of the College Republicans. They spoke about what the inauguration means to their respective RSOs. Read all these stories and more at cm-life.com. That was this week's news in 60 seconds. Up next, we talk to Teresa Homsi about the Clery Report. And here we are with Teresa Homsi to talk about the recent CMU PD safety report that just came out and released right before we got back from our break. So, Teresa, now this is like a yearly thing, and this is actually 2019. Just to clarify, this is 2019's report.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so have you looked at these safety reports before or worked on them?
No, so I cover CMU PD, obviously for CM Life, but in past years, it's just been whoever is the beat reporter for CMU PD. So this is my first time looking at the report, but the report also includes numbers from 2017. So it includes 2017, 2018, and 2019. And the report, it's the Clery report. It's this annual report required by the U.S. government. Basically, every university that receives federal funding needs to submit an annual campus safety report.
I'm so sorry. But yeah, that's great. So why does it include all the way back from 2017? Is that just included in the Clery Act itself?
Yeah, it's just so you could see the change between the last 3 years.
Okay. Why did it only come out now?
So it's a report that covers the entire statistics from the preceding year, and it takes a while to release it. Normally it's published in October, but because of COVID, they pushed back the deadline to December. And I get that it covers, it's a full report of 2019, entirely the 2019 fiscal year. And I get that it's going to be outdated and a little bit irrelevant because we just completed 2020. And so whatever happened in 2019 seems like it was ages ago. But
yeah. What was the most surprising development to you in this report?
Development, I wouldn't call it a development, but as far as trends go, the story that I released focused on the number of campus drug violations and drug law arrests. They've significantly decreased. So the violations that happened on CMU's campus decreased by about 38% from between 2018 and 2019. And that is definitely a direct result of the legalization of recreational marijuana. In 2018, there were about 117 incidents that received some sort of disciplinary action, and in 2019, that would drop down to 73. So that's a pretty big change. And another thing that is important to understand about the violations, I was just talking about the violations, but there's also a separate category that focuses on just drug law arrests.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, there were no drug law arrests made, but in 2018, there were about 31 that CMUPD made on campus. So when I was going in and speaking to Mike about, CMUPD Lieutenant Mike Sienkiewicz, I wanted to clarify like the language between those two things, because I'm like, what's the difference between these drug law arrests and what's the difference between like drug law violations? And so the violations are basically reported by, say someone is smoking weed in their dorm, the residence hall director like gets news of it, and then they write it up and they send it to student conduct, and it doesn't involve CMUPD at all. So that's why those violations still exist, but the laws have ceased to exist, the drug law arrest, because it's now a civil infraction if you are smoking weed on campus, or if you're using it under 18, and you will not get arrested for a civil infraction.
Okay, what is
anymore.
a civil infraction before we go on, just to clarify that?
I wish I was an expert on these terms, but from what I understand, a civil infraction is just like a ticket.
Okay.
And it's not enough to warrant you to get sent to jail. And previously, like before marijuana was legalized, it was a misdemeanor to have it, and you would go to jail, and you would go through the whole process of having to get out. And yeah, I'm not a legal expert, so I want to make sure that if I do mess anything up, this is just from my understanding, and it's not the most. Yeah.
So now student conduct records the weed violation. So what does that mean? What happens to the students?
I'm not really entirely sure on the whole process, but from what I understand, if you are caught with, marijuana in your dorm room or just on campus, they treat it more like they treat alcohol violations. So your RHD will find out about it, and they'll just go through the process. And I guess it's really depending on like the circumstances. I'm not really sure about the entire process, but the key thing is that it's basically like having alcohol.
From that, there are some other trends in the report that you highlighted, such as stalking. Was that part of like some serial case, or was that just an odd trend that happened?
Yeah. So the previous year, the 2018. So this is the 2019 report. In the 2018 report, that was covered by Melissa Frick, and she focused more on sexual assault numbers, because rape had increased by about 3 times, and by tripling it, the incidents are pretty low that are on the report. So it's just a matter with sexual misconduct. It's just a matter of reporting. Personally, I don't think that the report has an accurate number, and it's an accurate gauge of sexual assault that happens on campus. In 2018, there were only 7 reports of rape, and that was a decrease from the previous year. The previous year was 12, and then it went down to 7, and that was the exact opposite of what happened the previous year. So the numbers are kind of like this. Whenever I spoke with the CMUPD, they said that those numbers are within range for what they expect to get, so they're not really necessarily out of the ordinary. Same thing with like the number of the reports of domestic violence and the reports of stalking. Those tripled from 3 incidents in 2018 to 13 in 2019. And whenever I asked about like this seems like a big increase, they just kind of were like, it's a matter of who reports it, and whether or not these incidents get reported.
Why do you, just to back up a little bit, you said that you didn't think that the report was very accurate, especially on like rape numbers. Why do you think that?
Well, there, when you consider just like the annual sexual assaults that happens on college
Hmm.
campuses, I've heard this statistic my entire life. 1 in 5 women experience, like, are sexually assaulted. I'm sure the numbers are even higher for just general sexual harassment or sexual misconduct. And so 7 cases being reported for an entire year on a college campus in 2019 as well. It's not 2020, because that number is going to be, I don't know what that number is going to be, but it's definitely not going to be accurate, or very reflective of like what an average year is, because everyone got sent home for a while, and people aren't interacting as much. But we're looking at 2019, and the fact that it says there's 7 reports of rape, like, just from what I know from speaking to my friends and from just interacting with like young women who go to CMU, like that doesn't really reflect the national numbers, or like the statistics that we see when it comes to, it's a really common occurrence. And so seven reports doesn't really line up with the fact that there's about 19,000 students at CMU.
Yeah. So I know this report only covers 2019, but did you have the opportunity to talk about what 2020 numbers could look like?
So that is something that comes up a lot when I meet with Mike. We meet every single week,
Hmm.
and we do the crime log. We go over like what's happened in the week. I also did a ride along on Halloween, and that night, everyone, you're sitting in the cop cruiser and you can hear them communicating over the radio, and they were all just kind of astonished at how quiet it was. There were a few calls about like people being loud and partying, but for the most part, like this past year, 2020, from speaking to the cops, has been very unusual. Most what usually drives crime, according to the logs and the officers that I've been speaking to, is football games,
Hmm.
and people from outside of CMU coming to CMU to attend a football game. But then when you look at this past year, there's been no events, no huge gatherings. People are trying to, isolate themselves as well. There's been a few parties, of course, but like for the most part, CMU students at least seem to be following guidelines and adhering to them. So the reports that they've been coming out with this past year have been kind of down. So I will find out, I guess, in an entire year from now, really how much the numbers have changed. But it seems like it's going to be next to nothing, especially when you consider that this semester in the spring, you guys all went home
Yeah.
in like March. So
Yeah. So speaking about the future report and any other report, what should our readers keep a lookout for if they decide to look at these reports?
I guess that's just, it's hard to say because it really does vary. I think when we were just talking about sexual assault, the fact that the numbers are always so low on the reports, it's important to understand that it's not actually reflective of how many incidents actually occur on campus. So that's something to keep in mind. And obviously, we want there to be fewer cases of sexual assault, but if the numbers do increase, that can just mean that more people are reporting it. And that's something that whenever I speak to CMU PD, they really encourage people to come forward, because even though there are like a lot of natural stigmas and fears about coming forward and reporting things, like It's a whole thing. There is a really, really great story that I'd like to bring back into the spotlight. It was published a couple of years ago. It was published in 2018, I think, about the process of reporting sexual assault and all of your options and all of the resources that are available. And I think that stuff does need to be made known. If not, if people don't want to go forward and, create a whole investigation, that's completely understandable because it is a very traumatic experience. And it's difficult to talk about. I do want to say, at CMU, they do try really hard to be very respectful. And that is definitely one of their priorities, is making people feel comfortable in reporting. I know that the process has significantly changed from, the last 20 years. There's a lot more respect. And in the past, there was probably more pressure on the I don't want to say victim, the survivor. I know that that's a change, just the terminology that we use to talk about sexual assault. I know that in the past, it was always on the survivor to prove the fact that it happened. And from, speaking to different resources, they've really tried to change that approach to immediately just believing the survivor and going forward. So that just in that little approach has changed. So I want to let people know that if they have experienced something, that there are resources that are available for them. And although the Clery report, to tie it back to the report, doesn't necessarily reflect the realities, they're not alone, and that there are reasons why they should, speak to someone about it, if not necessarily to cause a complete investigation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything else you hope people take away, or?
I guess my main focus with this article was about the campus drug violations. I didn't really focus much on sexual assault because I think it's deserving of its own story, and hopefully I might start working on that. I want to have a more accurate, see if I can get a more accurate gauge of how much sexual assault actually happens at CMU. But that aside, I guess the whole, as far as drugs are concerned and the liquor law violations, which have also decreased, a lot of changes in the report are just a matter of law, the law changes, and therefore the number of cases also changes. So, with recreational marijuana being made legal, that's obviously why there's no drug law arrests anymore. And the same thing happened with alcohol. So in 2018, they changed it from a first offense, minor in possession. They would no longer arrest that. That was just a civil infraction. So the same thing happened with drugs. And this, I know, is very confusing at times, and I can kind of be all over the place when I'm talking about it. But essentially, I'm saying changes that we see in the report also can reflect changes that are actually happening in the real world on a broader sense. And I think that's really interesting that, something that seems so distant, like a state passing this law, does have immediate effects in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Teresa. I think that's all the questions I had. I think we covered pretty much everything about the report. Thank you so much for talking with me and talking about this. Let's make sure that, people who do suffer from sexual assault can get those resources too. That's very important. And thank you for talking about me. Talking not about me, but with me, I mean.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me. Also, great job on the story that you just published, Ben. I wanted to bring that to light. So,
thank you. You've been listening to Past Deadline, a production of the CM Life podcast division. Every story referenced in this episode can be found at our website, cm-life.com. To keep up with us, follow us on social media at Central Michigan Life on Instagram, at CM Life on Twitter, or like and follow the Central Michigan Life Facebook page. I've been your host, the other Ben Jodway, and this has been Past Deadline. Until next week, so long and stay informed.